Join as we learn Chumash for Friday, the sixth Torah reading of Parshas Terumah. Yesterday we learned about the curtains that were there to separate the Holy of Holies with the sanctuary, as well as the opening of the tabernacle. Today we go back to the vessels that we have not yet completed. Now we're going to talk about the outer altar. Chapter 27, verse 1. V'asisas hamizbeach, and then you will make an altar. Atzei shitim, made out of acacia wood. Chomesh amis, it's going to be 5 cubits oirech long. V'chomesh amis roichev, and 5 cubits wide. Ravua yiyeh, it will be square. Hamizbeach, ravua yiyeh hamizbeach, the altar shall be square. V'sholish amis kemosei, and it's going to be 3 cubits tall. Verse 1, Rashi. Vasisas hamizbeach v'sholish amis kemosei. Devarim kichsavim. The words as they say, that's what they mean. Meaning, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's what Rabbi Yehuda says. What their discussion over here is, when we talk about the roof and the height, does that include the protrusions, the corners that came out of it, or not? Rabbi Yossi says no. Nemar kan, it says of here ravua that it should be square. Nemar ravua, and it also says by the inner altar it should be square. Just like over there in the inner altar, the height of the altar was twice the size of its length. Afkan, so too, the height should be twice the size of its length. Well, if it said then, if it's 5 amos wide, then the height should be 10. Mani mekayim, what do I get here? Sholish amis kivasei, when it says then that 3 amos, 3 cubits should be its height, misvas haseive v'lamaila. It's not talking about the actual altar. The top part of the altar, where we're going to soon see that it has these little corners, that was 3 amos tall. But the actual thing itself was 10 amos tall. Verse 2. V'asisa karnoisav, now it's actual corners. Al arba pinaisav, in each one of the 4 corners, you should make protrusions in the 4 corners. From the actual piece itself, it should have these protrusions. And you shall cover them with copper. Don't make corners and then afterwards put them on top. The whole overlay on the top that had to be with the protrusions coming out of it, with the corners that were there. That's what, according to Rabbi Yossi, who wants to learn, that it was 10 amos tall, the entire altar, and the top part was 3 amos tall. And you should cover it with copper. The reason why it had to be covered with copper, this was to atone for the audacity and for the fact that the Jewish people, shenemer, as it says, for the way the Jewish people disrespected, or whatever it may be, as we know that this is going to be for the sacrifices that we were brought on it, and at the time, being that the word nechosha, as the word in Isaiah says that your forehead is as hard as copper, meaning as a person who has disrespect. Verse 3. V'asisa, with it you will make siraisav, pots, ledashne, which are going to be used to remove the ashes, v'ya'ov, and scoops, umizrkaisav, and basins, umizlkaisavs, and hooks, umachtoisav, and fire pans, l'chol kelev nasach techoshes. All of these vessels should be made out of copper. We're going to go through Rashi, which explains what all these items are. Siraisav, these are pots, kimin yoiris, like big pots. L'dashne, this was in order, l'hasir dashne, to take off the ashes. L'toicham, you'll put it into it. V'husha tergamunklus l'mispe kotme, to be able to collect the ashes. L'lispe sasadeshel l'seicham, at the end of every morning, in the morning, that they would have to clean off the ashes from the sacrifices that were burning there all day. Now, where does he get the word from? Kimilis b'lashin ivris mila achas mischalafas bepisrin l'shamish binyan l'stira. Kemoi. So he says the word ladashne means to clean off, even though the word lehasar means to remove garbage. So therefore Rashi says you have words in Hebrew where the word itself can explain or changes to the interpretation of the actual word. Meaning, the word itself can be used either to understand the word or to destroy meaning to build or sometimes to destroy. Meaning, you can either say the word to keep what you're trying to say or to actually deflect and say the opposite of what you're trying to say. For example, Vatashresh shirasheh. When it wants to say that the person was planting its roots, that means to keep it strong. So he says, the pasuk in Tehillim says that they rooted themselves in the land of Israel. Or evil mashrish. V'chilufei, the opposite you also have. Ubechol tvuasa sharish. When you want to say you want to remove the roots, you will use a similar word, which is tisharish. So you see the word tashresh means to root itself, and tisharish means to uproot it. Ukamoyu, and he brings another example. Kisifer pera v'chilufei misayif pura. Mifasheich sifer. Ukamoyu za'achrin atzma shiber atzma tzama v'kamoyu v'yiskalu ba'avanu v'chilufei siklu me'evan asiru ma'avanu. You have a place, for example, when it comes to stoning, it says, and they stoned them with stones, and then the opposite, saklum avneh, remove the stones, is the exact same word, from the word skila. So you can see this, and so too, vayaskeyu v'salkeyu afkan. So therefore, his point is that in our case, where it uses the word latashne, it can mean also lahosir dashne, to remove the ash as well. The ya'av, which is in this case means these scoops. And what were they used for? They were like rakes. And these were scoops or shovels that they used to take the ash with it. This is like a small tool that has a small shovel and that has a handle to it that you should be able to use it to rake the ashes off. It's these were basins. To use to be able to collect the blood from the sacrifices. These were meat forks, flesh forks. They were tilted forks. They would use it to be able to hit the meat, and it would grab the meat, it would stick the meat into it. They were able to turn it over so it would be able to burn better on the actual fire. Will cause it to burn quicker. Machtoisav, the shovels. What were these shovels for? Beis kibul yeshlan. This was a bigger, wider shovel. This had a place that you were able to hold it, and they were able to take coals min hamizbeach off the altar with it. This was that they would take the coals from the outer altar and bring it into the inner altar, that they would be able to burn the incense with it then. Because they would be able to stir the coals with it, that's why it's called a shovel. Machtes. From the concept of taking one fire from one place and bringing it to another. All its vessels. Why does it say lechol, to all its vessels? Kol kelef. It means to say all the vessels that were there. Verse 4. Now on this altar you will then make a great michbar, a great ma'aser necheshes, made out of copper network. And then you shall make on this network, there was like a web, if you want to call it, arba tabis necheshes, four copper rings, al arba ketzesav, on its four corners. 4, Rashi, michbar. What does the word michbar mean? Loshin kavara, like this terminology of a net that has a bunch of holes in it. They made it like for a garment on the altar. There was a lot of holes in it, like a net, like a sieve. This word, the actual verse, is a little out of order. The Koip Yisrael, and you should read it. You should make for it a nice garment around the altar, which would be made out of this net type of material. Verse 5. And you will then place this tachas karkev hamizbeach, below the border of the altar, milmata, beneath it. And this net, this mesh at chatzi hamizbeach would be halfway through the altar, the middle way of the altar. So here Rashi explains and says what's going on over here to understand where exactly this was. Karkiv hamizbeach, around the altar. Kol davar hamakiv sakiv beikul kori karkiv. Anything that's around something is called a karkiv. K'moy sheshanin b'kel sheichtin, like it says in the tractate of Chulin. Elin gomel klei eis kol she'asad lashav al karkiv. What's considered a a vessel, anything that's going to be used to surround something. This is how they make these special designs around these round designs, around these tables, around the safsalei, around the benches. This was made for beauty, that it should look nice, for ornament, for decoration. So too for the altar. They made these ornaments, this little engravings around it, and this was an amma wide around the wall, just for ornaments. And this was at 3 amos, 3 cubits high. That's where this ornament was. This was according to the opinion that we mentioned before, according to the opinion that says that the ark was twice the height of its width, so therefore the ornament was midway by the 3 amos tall, 3 amma mark. What do I have from here? 3 amos high from the part, from this ornament higher. However, when we talk about the place where the actual Kohanim would walk on the wall of the altar, that was not in the copper altar. Where did the Kohanim have to walk? They had to walk on the inside the corners. That means in the altar that was in the Holy Temple that King Solomon built, there was a place around the altar that the Kohanim were able to walk. And that's where they would place the sacrifices in the different places. In the altar that we're talking about over here, they had to walk on the actual altar in between the corners, the protrusions that we mentioned previously. This is what it says in Tractate of Zvachim. What does it mean around a karkov? Between each corner, Amma was the width of an amma. Inside of them was an amma. So in between each corner was an amma, and that's the amma, the cubit where the Kohanim would walk, and that's the way they would get around the whole altar. These 2 ammas that we're referring to in this case are considered, that means between the 2 protrusions, is what's called a karkev. And when the Gemara there elaborates, but it says tachas karkev amizbeach mulmata. Why can you say that the karkev going around means between the protrusions if the actual verse says it has to be underneath the karkev, underneath it? So from here you learn that the karkev actually means around the frame of the altar, and underneath it was this mesh. And over there the Gemara answers that there were two karkevs. One karkev, as we will call it, was for beauty, which was the base and the frame around by the mesh. The other one was made that the Kohanim shouldn't burn themselves. So they had to have a space away from the fire that the Kohanim should walk, and they should be able to go there. And they shouldn't slip from the Mizbeach when they're walking around it. The one that was on the wall was for the beauty. And underneath it was the mesh, and that reached halfway, midway of the altar. So what we have over here is that the actual mesh was an amma wide, and that told you where the half of the altar was. Because with different sacrifices, we can learn in the book of Leviticus that some sacrifices had to be, the blood was sprinkled above, and some of them was sprinkled below. How did they know what the midway was? Where that mesh was told them that's the midway point, and some the blood was sprinkled above it, and some underneath it. Then there was another karkev that was on the top, in between the protrusions, where the Kohanim would walk. The same thing is also when they built in the Holy Temple that King Solomon built. There was a line that they put around the altar that they knew which way and where they would sprinkle the blood. So too the ramp that they made for it. Even though it's not explained here in this part, being that we already learned in the end of Parshas Mishpatim that they would not be allowed to go up to the altar with steps. There must have been a ramp. So therefore, the ramp, they would make a nice, long, steep ramp, a long ramp, a nice, beautiful, smooth ramp. And that's how we know that there was a ramp. That's what the Mechilta says. So Mizbech Adamu, Mizbech Anacheshes. And therefore, I want to refer that Mizbeach, that altar which was talking about at the end of the Torah reading of Yisro, where we speak about the altar, and to go up with a ramp and not with steps, and an earthen altar is referring to this copper altar here. Why was it called an earthen altar? Because the inside of the altar was empty, was hollow. And they would fill it with earth. Wherever they would stop, while they would travel, they would take earth and fill up the inside of the altar. Where was these ramps situated? On the south side of the altar. It was separated, it was like a thin hairbreadth in between the ramp and the actual altar. And the edge of it would go all the way until the curtains of the courtyard around it. That's how long the ramp was. So the ramp was about 21.5 cubits, which would then reach the center of the altar, which would be in the center of the courtyard. This is all according to the opinion that says that the altar was 20 amos tall. Well, but according to Rabbi Yehuda, where he says that you have to read it the way it is, and then how tall was the altar? Only 3 cubits tall. Then the length of the ramp was only 10 amos tall. 10 amos long. This is what I learned in the Mishnah of 42 midos, and the fact that I told you that the ramp was separated from, there was a hairbreadth between the ramp and the actual altar, this is also discussed in the tractate of Zvachim 62b. Verse 6. And then you will make poles for the altar, poles made out of acacia wood, and you will coat them with copper. Verse 7. You will then bring the poles in the rings, and these poles will then be on both sides of the altar. The purpose of them is you only need to have them in when you will carry it, when it's carried. Rashi, betabois, in the rings. The word is betabois. Arba tabois, in those 4 rings that I mentioned earlier, shenasul and nichber, that were made by the mesh. Verse 8. You should make a hollow structure of panels. The way I showed you to make it on the mountain, that's the way you should make it. Rashi says, it should be empty, it should be hollow on the inside. Like we mentioned, wherever they went, it was hollow, and then they would fill it with earth. You're going to make panels of wood on each side, and in the middle, it's going to be empty. It's not going to be one big solid piece of wood. Mishamish can mean sadan, not one solid piece of wood. It shouldn't be made as one piece of wood, which is thick 5 by 5, but it's going to be boards connected, and the middle is going to be empty. This concludes the 6th Torah reading of Parshas Terumah.